impacts of 60 gigahertz are not widely published information, but here's what I can tell you. And it's in part, ironically, from the promotional material of the big telecom companies themselves. Here it says, 60 gigahertz has a very distinct impact on none other than oxygen itself. Yes, here are the articles released by companies who are touting the benefits of 60 gigahertz. They openly admit that 60 gigahertz is absorbable by oxygen. You can see in this graph here its impact on oxygen. All the frequencies before 60 gig are not impacted. Then once it hits that frequency, it spikes and becomes hugely absorbed by oxygen. Now, in this article by the companies selling products that are going to run on 60 gig, they say that it's going to help its interference levels. Oh, isn't that nice? They don't want your first shooter video games to lag. And most of us know from mainstream releases promoting FIVEG that things like water and trees are going to get in the way of this frequency. So how in the world does this even make sense that we are using it? Unless their intentions are something else besides faster speeds. Anyway, knowing that this frequency impacts oxygen, now does it make sense to you how possibly when you mess with the absorption of oxygen in the human body, let me give you one guess which organ is going to suffer first. The way that the 60 gigahertz impacts oxygen is this. Oxygen, the atom, is O. Oxygen, the molecule, is O2. Two atoms together. Now, these two atoms creating the oxygen molecule are sharing some electrons. 60 gigahertz causes the electrons surrounding oxygen molecules to spin. Right. Somewhat akin to how high-powered microwaves running on 2.4 are impacting molecules in foods such as water. They're heating in part by impacting those molecules to rotate or oscillate with each wave. The movement energy from the rotation of these super tiny water molecules is actually helping to heat the rest of the food. So in a similar way that 2.4 causes H2O to oscillate, 60 gigahertz, even at lower powers, is causing the electrons on oxygen molecules to spin. And as you might imagine, changes to the spin frequencies on oxygen electrons can have impacts on human biology. When you breathe in, the reason that breathing air into your lungs gets oxygen into your blood and therefore in important places like your brain is because the oxygen entering into your lungs gets picked up by a very important iron-containing protein called hemoglobin in your blood. But the unfortunate impact of oxygen molecules spinning the electrons is that it makes the hemoglobin unable to uptake the oxygen and get it to the rest of your body. Now, this info is taken from a textbook called Magnetobiology, Underlying Physical Problems. But even beyond this, isn't the fact that the telecom companies are admitting that 60 gigahertz is absorbable by oxygen just stunning information? And shouldn't the fact that 60 gigahertz even fundamentally interacts with oxygen, the most abundant and arguably most important element to all of biological life, be headline news that stops everything until we deeply test the implications of that? If you believe that they must have already tested 60 gigahertz for health and safety, please listen very carefully to what Big Telecom admits when they were asked that very question.
5G, as you well know, also uses higher frequency waves that don't travel as far and will rely on a network of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of small cell sites. And the question then is, are there any health implications, any public safety implications? So my question for you, particularly Mr. Gillen and Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Senator. I think, thank you for your focus on the issue. Safety is paramount, and as you alluded to, we rely on the expert agencies, we rely on the findings of the FDA and others as to the requirements to keep all of us safe. There are no industry-backed studies, to my knowledge right now. Happy to visit with you as to what opportunities you think there needs to be more studies, and we're always for more science. We also rely on what the scientists tell us.
So essentially, the answer to my question, how much money? Zero.
I can certainly follow up with you, Senator. To my knowledge, there's no active studies being backed by industry today.
Anybody else know of industry commitments to to back research, fund it, support it, to ascertain scientifically the health effect?
No, I'm not aware of any.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Is this all starting to make sense? What they are calling the CV is acute respiratory disease. And while you can't believe 100% anything coming out of China, it seems to me there were enough leaks of people suddenly falling over in the streets that the CH government doesn't want people talking about or sharing, with no other apparent illness. Guys, listen, CV is not new, okay? It's a cold, it's a flu. That's why it says on the side of hand sanitizers like Purell and the side of a can of Lysol that it kills it. It's common enough to be listed on the most common disinfectants. But now the CH government is admitting that people can have virtually no symptoms and suddenly fall over. No symptoms, but then they can still have it. What is it? Lack of oxygen can do that too, right? I mean, let's use common sense here. What happens to you when you have the flu, right? You start to feel bad, achy, you call in sick, you don't want to go outside, you go to lay down in bed, mama brings you some chicken noodle soup, right? Or you just bopping around fully clothed, doing normal things and fall over. If your lungs are not able to put oxygen in your blood, how long would it take you to fall over? Not long, okay? Not long. So we're going to get into some specific symptomology.
Boom, dude. I told you China was doing this. I told you they got the frickin' the FIVE G going on. Here, listen to this.
Besides these that I just mentioned in a minute, but I can already hear some of you asking, but Dana, what about those quarantine cruise ships? They weren't even in the city of WHAN. That's very true. And I have some very relevant news for you on that topic. These ships that were quarantined just so happened to be from the Diamond Princess line of cruise ships. So let's check out this PR release from Princess Cruises. Continuing Princess Cruises' comeback new promise, a commitment focused on investing more than $450 million across the global fleet. Now here they go into some of these very expensive upgrades that they have added. Well, one of the upgrades that they go into great detail explaining on their website with high-end marketing videos showing exactly how it works is their network connectivity. Here's from their press release. Carnival Corporation and Regal Princess announces they will, quote, establish a new industry apex in connectivity capabilities. It says, using its newly developed connectivity service, MedallionNet, and working with SES Networks. More about them in a minute. They talk about attempting to achieve unheard of bandwidth and how MedallionNet is made possible through, quote, an inventive array of an antenna, networks, equipment, and configuration innovations that combine to make the Regal Princess the only vessel on the planet that is currently capable of achieving this speed. Well, according to the SCS website, there are some Navy ships that can do this, powered by our O3B fleet of MEO or medium Earth orbit satellites. Yes, they are admitting to working with SES, and although they're calling it Wi-Fi, that is a misnomer considering that the company seems to be using millimeter waves. Here are a few clips from some of their videos.
Stream movies, shows, and sports, as well as make Wi-Fi phone calls and video conference calls like FaceTime. That's all possible in large part thanks to what lies on board, what flies in the skies above, and the way we fuse all the technology together to ensure your experience is as great as possible. MedallionNet uses mid-Earth orbit satellites, or MEO, that are positioned 8,000 kilometers away. There are 20 MEO satellites surrounding the equator that see our Medallion-class ships, which aligns with destinations like London and Vancouver, and which corresponds to approximately 80% of Earth's surface. GEO satellites actually still reign supreme when enabling connectivity in the polar regions. This is because GEO is not impacted by rain and weather. So onboard Princess Cruises ships that feature MedallionNet, we leverage MEO and GEO satellites to keep you connected to the things you love most, and seamlessly shift to GEO when in the north. Thanks, GEO. In these tougher conditions, we're glad you're there.
So by admitting in their own video that water can interfere with the connectivity is the giveaway that they are using millimeter waves and not just the type of frequencies that Wi-Fi runs on today. Now, when you look a little more into this company, SES, that's when you find this crazy information. You can see they're presently teaming up with governments, including the U.S. government, and of course our MILITARY. When you look at tabs like this one that starts intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, one realizes this company's products and services catalog looks like a Homeland Security dream or privacy lover's nightmare, depending on how you want to see it. And here you can also see on the SES website that they are using these satellites to beam none other than what? 5G. So, are these passengers getting sick from a VIRUS? That, by the way, they are admitting that the people on the ship haven't been tested for, or are they getting sick from millimeter wave frequencies being beamed at them even while they sit trapped in quarantine? Wow. All right. So what about all those other cities? Other cities that people have left CH4 and still got their CV virus? Well, I mean, the ones that I'm not watching this every minute. I've been working too hard on this piece, but all the cities that I've found that supposedly have this, this has happened to so far, they are people who are already openly advertising that they have FIVEG themselves. Places like South Korea, check. Hong Kong, check. And then to further your questioning about what Central CH is actually dealing with besides the VIRUS, there was that news released in several alternative sources, and some even mainstream in 2018-19, announcing that CH had completed construction of a project to build a giant antenna that was 5 times the size of New York City. Do you remember that? Said this experimental radio antenna is rumored to have taken 13 years to finish, and although its official purpose was, quote, to detect earthquakes and minerals, others speculate it would be used to communicate with submarines. While the article states the exact site of the facility is not being disclosed, but information in Chinese research journals suggests it was in the Huazhong region. Oh, just so happens to include Wuhan, the capital of the Hubei province. There you go. So there's that. But, let's get deeper into what 60 gigahertz can also do. Now, this was an interesting paper released by one specific hospital in WHAN, and this doctor with this YouTube channel, he was going over them in great detail. A lot of people have a lot of attention on this, but unfortunately, they're not looking at it through the eyes of the FIVEG that I'm sharing with you now, and so a lot of things to him don't make sense, but when you look at it knowing this, it all fits together rather perfectly. Of the people admitted and studied in this particular hospital, they got real specific about the symptoms, and so they broke it down from outpatient to those admitted in ICU. And of the people admitted into intensive care, it says this: over 60% of people had acute respiratory distress, respiratory failure. Symptoms included shortness of breath, rapid breathing, and bluish skin tone. Can that happen with lack of oxygen? Yeah. They had arrhythmia. I don't know how much you guys remember, but microwave frequencies can absolutely cause this. He couldn't explain it with his normal background. There was also shock. That is a state of insufficient blood flow to the tissues as a result of problems with the circulatory system. Now, of all the muscles that work really hard, wouldn't you say your heart is one of them? So when you start running, you start breathing hard. Why? Your muscles need more oxygen to continue working, right? Now, if you're not getting that into your muscles because it isn't coming into your hemoglobin, there's no feeding your muscles, including your heart, thus, right, acute cardiac injury, which is also listed in this. Now, while it's true, pneumonia also causes respiratory distress and an inability to get proper oxygen. That's true. However, don't we all know by now that pneumonia causes your lungs to do one basic thing? Fill with fluid. Fill with phlegm. Yummy. Almost every 101 tutorial on pneumonia says the same thing. The main problems with pneumonia are the lack of oxygen as a result of phlegm. And how you can even tell what phase of pneumonia you're in according to the color of your phlegm. Well, check this out. Now, much of what I'm finding regarding this CV is pointing to people who don't actually have fluid in their lungs at all, but they have dry coughs. Not wet coughs like this, but dry coughs with no phlegm. So in the same report, this doctor found the same thing, dry cough. But also, these social leaks of media, people who are using social media, they're so desperate. They're desperate to get help. Here they're saying the same thing. Look at this. Inability to breathe and dry cough. So please, would one of you virologists care to explain to me why these people have respiratory distress, aka can't breathe, if there's no phlegm causing the problems with oxygen uptake? I mean, besides the 60 gigahertz frequency making hemoglobin unable to properly bind to oxygen. Now, a lot of people had scans. Scans are showing that people have damage to the lungs. But how do we know that this isn't due to other repercussions of millimeter waves on oxygen itself? I mean, when your voice, this is slightly off topic, but not really. When your voice matches a frequency of a crystal glass, it becomes absorbed by, and it shatters, right? I'm just saying. Why am I having to ask these questions? Also, it's mentioned, acute kidney injury. We know kidneys can be damaged when there's so little oxygen in the blood that the other gases become higher, like carbon dioxide in the other ones. Acidosis of the blood happens. Again, guys, I am not a doctor. Do not listen to anything I say. This is for entertainment purposes only. However, I'm just trying to use common sense here and ask some questions that no one else seems to be asking. So, CV seems to cause many problems. Okay, they can all be tied to a lack of oxygen and acidosis of the blood. Now, we know that the impacts of magnetic frequencies can have a result of things like seizures, right? How often do people with pneumonia have seizures? But we have seen tons of leak footage of people with exactly that, seizures. I've also heard fungal infections mentioned in relation to this, and electromagnetic fields can absolutely exacerbate fungus and mold. Now, of course, people talk about fevers in the media, but they also say they can have all these problems without the fever. How many times have you had flu without the fever? I'm just saying. But along with this theory I'm sharing, wouldn't it make sense, given the possibility of a frequency WEAPON? How do we know if a mild fever can't also be a result of all these other aspects of 60 gigahertz? The answer is, we don't know. We don't know. And I don't want to belabor this, but please, could someone out there who actually knows magnetobiology and who's not employed by the WHO or a big pharma company get on this? Because I'm not qualified. If you're really starting to take all of this in, everything that I'm saying, and you're starting to consider this as a possibility, your mind may start to spin with the major implications, and it should.